Hello everyone, as I'm sure you can tell from the title of this video, today I will be doing an analysis and review of Dostoevsky's famous work, Crime and Punishment. So before we begin, I just wanted to do a quick introduction about Dostoevsky for those of you who are not acquainted. I would really suggest even doing some additional reading and research on your own, as Dostoevsky really did have a fascinating and eventful life. Dostoevsky was born in Moscow in 1821. He was a renowned novelist, essayist, a journalist, and short story writer. His works delve into the deep philosophical and religious themes of the human condition, and especially within the backdrop of 19th century Russia with like spiritual and political turmoil that was going on. Being born in Moscow, Dostoevsky was introduced to literature very early on. After his mother's passing in 1837, Dostoevsky went to the Military Engineering Institute, where he studied and then practiced engineering afterward. He wrote a first novel called Poor Folk, which ended basically introduced him into the literary circles of Russia. And kind of propelled him in his early stages of his career. He was involved in a lot of literary groups with that kind of discussed and considered a variety of diverse ideas. However, his involvement in one of these groups, the Petrovsky Circle, which kind of like criticized Tsarist Russia at the time, really got him into trouble, as the group was arrested and actually he was sentenced to be executed. But it ended up being a mock execution, and right before they were to be executed, their sentence was communed, and they were actually sentenced to 4 years of hard labor in Siberia instead. The great Russian philosopher, critic, and essayist Nikolai Berdyaev is quoted saying, "So great is the worth of Dostoevsky that to have produced him is by itself sufficient justification for the existence of the Russian people in the world." Quite the grand praise, but maybe not too far from the truth. So Dostoevsky has many shorter and longer works. Some of his most notable long works that are kind of considered the greats are The Idiot, The Demons, and of course like the Brothers Karamazov, as well as Crime and Punishment, which we'll be covering here today. Um, Out of these that I mentioned, the Brothers Karamazov is really considered one of the greatest philosophical novels ever written. And maybe in some later future video, I'll begin to maybe I'll tackle that, but that would be down the road as it's a very daunting work. In the meantime, there is Hubert Dreyfus does have an amazing lecture series that is way better than anything I could ever do in terms of covering that. And his work, like he covers the Brothers Karamazov in great detail, and it's really just a great lecture series. I would highly recommend that for any Dostoevsky buffs or fans to check that out. So from the title of this video, as I mentioned, we will be covering Crime and Punishment in this part one, which I will probably end up making multiple parts of this, maybe 5, but I'm not so sure yet. But the reason I picked this novel to start off with is there's a couple of reasons, both personally for myself and also in the consideration that it is one of his like major great works, and it's probably one of the more well-known ones as well. But for me personally, it was kind of when I was very young, still, one of my teachers gave this to me as like a novel to read, as she kind of saw that I had like an inclination to, an interest towards philosophy and literature. And that was kind of my first like philosophical novel that I was given that was a serious one. And then later, when I was kind of being reintroduced into when I was trying to take my study and analysis of these like great works more seriously, I began with like rereading Crime and Punishment as kind of my foray into a more serious, like dedicated study into the classics and philosophy. So for those two private reasons, I also do have a funny side anecdote. I have a friend who is a lawyer, and when he was still in law school doing his kind of like internship in the summers with a like a law clerk, or not law clerk, sorry, like a law judge. I think with a judge. That judge said basically that um, for anybody who wants to work under him, they need to have read Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. I'm not really sure if my friend ever did end up reading that, but he ended up working for him, so maybe he did. I'm not sure. So I just wanted to preface this discussion and analysis with some humility. Dostoevsky is a giant of a thinker with so many ideas to explore and just consider. We will merely be, I think, scratching the surface of the ocean here and not going anywhere near to the depths. I'll do my best, but it is, there's scholars who dedicate their lives to studying his works. However, having said that, I do think that we will get to explore a lot of the profound themes and ideas and some of my own personal interpretations of certain passages that I think that are key and some of the ideas that Dostoevsky explores. Um, and then, of course, having noted that in this analysis, there will be naturally some plot spoilers. So if you have not read this work and you want to go into it fresh, I would recommend maybe reading it alongside this analysis, or even just clicking away and then maybe coming back after you've read it. But if you have read it, or if you haven't, you want to see this analysis that maybe piques your interest to get started with the work. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of, yeah. And with that warning, yeah, let's continue on. Okay, so let's get into this classic. Our novel begins on a hot July in St. Petersburg, in a flat on the roof of a flat below the roof of a five-story building in St. Petersburg, Russia. Our protagonist's name is Raskolnikov. He's described as handsome, charming, but poor. And we kind of get this glimpse of him trying to sneak down from his like the top of his flat to avoid the landlady in which he owns rent to, but he can't afford to pay her at the moment. So we kind of get this image, not so flattering image, of him trying to evade his landlady as he comes down the stairs. We also, in a very Dostoevskian fashion, kind of start to see some of the internal monologues that the characters have. I think there's a very Dostoevskian feature that is like present across all of his novels, and I think is one of my favorite aspects of his work, where we kind of get to see these like philosophical musings of each of the characters that are present in the novels. But in this case, we do get to see some of the musings and internal monologue of Raskolnikov, even in the very early stages of the novel. Also, on these kind of like internal monologue and musings, I think there's some other authors that borrow and do this very well too. Yukio Mishima, the Japanese author, is I think another great one. In The Temple of the Golden Pavilion, a lot of times the characters, the character does have these like internal monologue and philosophical musings that are also very profound in a very Dostoevskian like fashion. I just thought that was another like a good example to keep in mind. So as we have Raskolnikov coming down the stairs of his flat trying to evade his landlady, we get one of these internal monologues that I thought was worth exploring. And I quote here: "I want to attempt a thing like that, and I'm frightened by these trifles," he thought with an odd smile. Yes. Everything is in someone's hands, and they let it slip out of cowardice. That's an axiom. It would be interesting to know what it is that people are most afraid of. Taking a new step, uttering a new word, is what they fear the most. But I'm talking too much. This attempt Raskolnikov is alluding to here is something that we will find out much later in the novel. For now, it remains a mystery, but it really will be a turning point in the novel later. And then, in terms of analyzing this quote, I think what Dostoevsky is hinting to here through Raskolnikov is primarily that frequently in life, the things that we do are afraid of to do the most, novel things, these are just the things that are required to take us to the next level, to get us to grow as individuals, to expand our scope, to succeed in whatever endeavor we're going to be taking on. It's precisely the thing that we fear, and it's usually these new things that are holding us back. There's that famous quote, "Everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear." And I think it's Dostoevsky really is kind of demonstrating that in this quote. And then, of course, like taking it even further beyond that analysis, that it's very frequently we know what the next stage that is needed, and it's something new, but we're afraid of taking that step and exploring that new concept, that new idea, or even action. Of course, frequently action, actually. Of course, the interesting thing here is that it's precisely the things that we know or subconsciously know that we should be doing that will take us to the next level, but we're too afraid to do. Those are precisely the things that we need to overcome. And of course, the way to overcome these things is through courage. Not the courage of Achilles from Homer's great works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, but more of the courage of Hector. Hector being kind of the individual who learns courage, the individual who like grows into courage. It's not the courage where it's like Achilles, where he's just born with that courageous, heroic grandeur. It's more of a more human, more learned courage, and that's kind of the courage that we as individual human beings need to use. That Hector courage to basically overcome and endeavor on these new areas of our life. So from here, after this quote, we get some more plot progression. Dostoevsky's character Raskolnikov kind of wanders the streets of St. Petersburg, Russia, and he is going to a pawn shop that is owned by a older woman in one of the areas of the town. And we kind of are introduced to her in a very not flattering way. She's kind of seen as like hoarding money, and then she does. He tries to pawn a silver pocket watch, and she basically underbids him, and he ends up getting a lot less than he thought he would originally for the pocket watch. After that, he goes back out wandering on the streets and ends up going to like a tavern where he meets like a drunk. And they kind of, you have these two solitary, lonely individuals engaging in a dialogue. I'm not going to cover the dialogue here. And again, this is, a lot of this plot here is very much worth reading and kind of seeing all the details in here. I'm just not going to be pausing on this here because I kind of want to cover some of the key like passage areas as we progress through the plot. So he does meet this man at the tavern. They have some two solitary individual discussions, and then he ends up taking that man back home. A key here is that we do get introduced to a important character that will be extremely important much later on. That character is Sonia. And a side note here, Sonia does, from etymologically, mean wisdom. So that's something to keep in mind as we get introduced more about her character later on in the novel. So our character, he gets back to his flat and he sleeps. And then the next day when he wakes up, he gets a letter from his mother, who kind of is very despondent that he has quit his like his law studies and even his like part-time work. And she also does mention that his sister is to be engaged and married to a businessman. Raskolnikov is not at all flattered or excited by this possibility that his younger sister will be married off to this man who he does not have very favorable kind of views towards. And then here we get another very famous Dostoevsky quote and musing. And I quote here: "It was clear now that we must not languish and suffer passively, in thought alone over questions that appear insoluble, but that we must do something, do it at once and do it quickly. He must decide on something, no matter what, on anything at all, or renounce life altogether," he cried suddenly, in a frenzy, "accept one's lot humbly as it is, once for all, and stifle everything in oneself, giving up every right to act, live, and love." So there's really a lot to unpack here, but and Dostoevsky in these lines basically points to some fundamental features of all human life, right? Problems and issues that plague human beings, irrespective of time and place and culture and geography. The choice put here is simply to have the ambition and drive to uh, renounce or accept one's lot humbly. And as free human beings, the choice is ours to make. Human beings being thrust out into the material world, um, our choice is to seize and embrace life or surrender to its pressures and external forces. I think ego here plays a large role. So individuals who have a meek ego are more likely to surrender to these external pressures and forces. And then individuals who have more grander egos would likely rage against the dying of the night, as the quote goes. And then they would seize every opportunity through action to achieve this goal. Um, we each of us have a choice which life presents us with material limitations and adversities. Of course, everybody's limitations of materiality are very different based on a variety of circumstances, a lot of which are outside of our control. So there's a very large diversity and flavor and a varying degree of the choices that we have to, the issues that we have to struggle with. And then through labor, we can choose to overcome these limitations. But of course, the other option is to surrender to them and accept our lot humbly. The choice is ours to make. And I think this is a theme that we will keep seeing in Dostoevsky's works, is that ultimately, in a lot of aspects of life, whether in this case, whether we choose to affirm or negate life, whether we choose to struggle through material difficulty and adversity, or whether we choose to surrender to it, as free human beings, free at least in a phenomenal sense that we perceive, like, and feel that we're free, the choice is ours to make. And that is one of the key aspects of this passage here. But of course, the choice for each of us is to struggle through labor to overcome these limitations and conditions, or to surrender to them and accept our lot. The choice is ours to make, and this is one of the kind of themes that is recurring through Dostoevsky's novels, and here this one as well, is that all human beings are ultimately free to make their choice about how they're going to, if they want to overcome adversity, if they want to surrender to adversity. It's ultimately the choice is theirs to make, and not even just adversity. The choice is for ours to make, and many choices across our life. So continuing with the plot, shortly after, there's another very interesting incident that happens as Raskolnikov is sleeping, and he's having a dream of when he was younger with his father, and they're passing by a tavern at night, and there's kind of like a rowdy crowd, like people are drinking, like having a great time, and as they kind of get closer to the tavern, a drunk owner of this cart with like a small horse in the front, he comes out and basically says to everyone get in, like hop into this cart. Of course, the animal is very like small, and like it's already struggling with the load of like wine and other items that are on the cart. So to for them to have even more individuals get into it would be like very extremely difficult. And then so the crowd's kind of laughing, and as they see the small horse, and they see that it can't possibly pull like the full load of all these people and items. Uh, the owner, he kind of becomes furious and begins to whip the horse and asks the others to join him. Uh, in this dream, Raskolnikov is young with his father, and he kind of looks on in shock at like what he's witnessing here, this like violence. Um, and then we kind of have this quote here: "She is struggling with her legs, gasping and shrieking from the blows of the three whips showering upon her like hail. The laughter in the cart and in the crowd is redoubled. But Mikolka," that's the kind of drunk owner of this cart and horse, he flies into a rage and thrashes the mare furiously with quickened blows, as though he thinks she can really gallop. A young man from the crowd is asked to join, like the violence that's being done to the animal. Meanwhile, poor young Raskolnikov is kind of crying and asking his father, like, what he's witnessing, what's going on, why are they beating the horse, like, why are they committing this violence, this cruelty on the animal? And here's a very subtle and interesting part, and it's very Dostoevskian in the way how he reveals the insights about humanity's fundamental nature. There is an old man in the crowd who basically kind of admonishes what he's witnessing. He critiques the man who's owning the animal and who's like beating it. Um, but then there's a subtle twist. Just a short while later, while they're still like continuing to harass and beat the animal, the old man could not help smiling to think of a wretched little nag like that trying to kick. So even the old man, who was originally against this violence, who was critiquing and admonishing the behavior that he was witnessing, even he begins to smile. Even he begins to kind of get a perverse enjoyment, a sadistic enjoyment from what he's witnessing. And the unsettling aspect, of course, here is that Dostoevsky is pointing us to a very unsettling truth about all human beings that's inherent in all humanity, and that's namely that human cruelty is worse than the beasts. And this is kind of a theme that is explored in some of his other works too. But um, we really get this notion that right, other animals might eat other animals, yes, right. Other animals, of course, eat each other to survive, but they're not going to be committing violence for the sake of violence and getting enjoyment from that act. Um, right. Even worse, the old man in the crowd who was making the comments against what they were doing to the animal shortly later is depicted as smiling and showing at least a tinge of sadistic enjoyment in the act he was witnessing. Uh, I'm just looking at my notes here because I feel like this is a key part that we should, I really want to hone in on. Dostoevsky here cuts to the core and presents to us an unsettling truth. Not only is man worse than the beasts, but this negative expression lies buried deeply in all of us, no matter how aware or unaware we are of it. There's a very interesting kind of similarity here. So the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, he is said to have been in Italy and witnessed kind of a very similar scene to the one that's witnessed by the in this dream of Raskolnikov, namely the whipping of a horse. And this really touched his soul so much that Nietzsche jumped onto this horse in Italy that was getting whipped, and he tried to defend it from the blows, and he tried to protect it. And while this was happening, he began to cry. Right. So here's this again, this act of violence of human cruelty that is worse than the beasts. That supposedly triggered Nietzsche to go and protect this horse. And actually, this episode is said to have kind of been the trigger for Nietzsche's insanity that lasted throughout the rest of his life. And it's I thought it was a very interesting similarity. It's almost the exact same depiction scene that we see in Raskolnikov's dream is said to have been kind of the catalyst of the kind of the breaking point uh, that caused Nietzsche to become insane and greatly impacted his life. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me on part one of this journey through Dostoevsky's masterwork, Crime and Punishment. I will be making more parts. Probably it's looking like a 5-part series. I'm not sure yet. I hope this kind of analysis piqued your interest at least somewhat in his work and in Dostoevsky in general. I can't sing his praises highly enough. So I would encourage you to read more of his stuff in general, and of course, read more in general at whatever you're interested in. In this next part two, I'll kind of continue our analysis, so stay tuned for that. If you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, and comment below. If you think that there's any further thoughts or ideas that you can add on to some of the ideas that I've explored with here, please feel free to do so. Like as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this by no means is this an exhaustive analysis. These are just from my perspective, some of the interesting quotes and passages that kind of resonated with me and made me want to explore his work here and his other works further. So yeah, please let me know if you have any additional interpretations or insights of what I've already discussed here. After I do finish this work, which like I said, will probably be maybe around 5 parts. I do plan on continuing with maybe some of his other masterworks if there is interest in those, or maybe I will go on to some of the other kind of authors that I'm interested in. I'm thinking of maybe something from the Japanese classics like Dazai, Kawabata, Mishima, or maybe something from the Greek classics like Homer or some of the Greek tragedians. Yeah, so let me know which book you would like me to review next. And until next time, keep reading and stay curious.